I wanted to give you a tour of one of my pieces so that you have a sense for how ideas and inspiration and mark making and carving come together in the finished piece that you see in the end. So we have here a greenware piece, which means it is unfired. So as you can see, this is about the size of a grapefruit, and it's a hollow, more or less spherical form that has various marks, lines, and topography on its surface. So typically what I do when I make this, so this is a Tondo Stone, which is a one-of-a-kind sculptural vase. And so it is in fact functional. So it has some marks or kind of cuts into the interior right here that you can use for the stems of flowers. And this in the end will be able to contain water. So typically what I do when I make these forms is I make maybe 2 or 3 dozen blank forms. So they're just entirely smooth and they don't have, I may shape them roughly, and then I set them aside and I carve them later. But for some reason on this piece, I was compelled to first make this little hemispheric divot. And I made that with this tool right here, which has 2 sides. It's essentially just a little metal rod with kind of a ball bearing on either side in different sizes. So this just fits right in here, and it makes this really perfect little half hemisphere in the surface. So I knew that when I returned to carving this piece, then that was going to be a really crucial part or a focal point in the composition. So the next thing that I did is I've been doing this experiment with a technique for making textured lines. And so I'm going to show you how that works right now. You can see some of them here right in the surface. And so what I do is I have here one of my blank forms. So as you can see, this is more about the shape of, maybe the shape of an avocado, let's say. And so I have these little round pieces of clay, and I'll zoom in on that so you can see some of the detail here. And they're very informal. They're just little rolls of clay that are a byproduct of the other things that I make. And so you can see it has little tiny surface, divots and markings and cracks. And so when you press these into wet clay, then it leaves a mark. So let me show you how that works right now. So you essentially just take it and you put it onto the surface, and then you roll it along that surface, kind of like a rolling pin. And then it leaves these very lightly textured, unique lines. And so, once this little roulette breaks down, because these are unfired, then they're kind of use it and lose it. They're not permanent. They'll break at some point and kind of become blurred. But you can see right here, it makes these interesting, very unique lines, and it's subtle, but as a mark maker, it's something that's kind of exciting to me because of the variability. So I was making some of these segmented lines on the surface of this piece that I'm working on, and it got me thinking actually about segmented legs. And so that reminded me then of the phylum of Arthropoda. So in the taxonomy or categorization of animal species, of species of life, its kingdom is kind of the overarching, so in that case it's Animalia, and then the phylum, the next level down in this classification, is Arthropoda. And so all the animals in Arthropoda have segmented legs and then exoskeletons as part of their structure. So Arthropoda includes crabs and including horseshoe crabs, as well as spiders, and I think lobsters are in there as well. And so that was kind of became the emerging theme. So orienting then the composition around this little hemisphere, I decided to create a little soft shell crab. And so I had, sort of an assortment of these segmented legs. And then I added this curvilinear triangle right here that has different kinds of textures on each side of that triangle. I added 2 little eyes, which if this were a crab would actually be on 2 little eye stalks. And then these little mouth parts here. If this were a spider, I think they'd be called palps. However, in the case of a crab, I think it's chelicerata or chelicerae. So these are probably, way back in evolution, were probably legs that then evolved for the purpose of moving food towards the mouth. So when I am making these essentially drawings, I'm not interested in any kind of photorealistic representation. I'm more interested in the concept or the archetype or the essence of a creature, whether it's animal, a vegetable, or mineral. And so in this case, arthropods, softshell crab is actually a decapod, so it would have 10 legs. However, I have not depicted 10 legs. I have some legs. And in addition to this idea of segmentation, I also wanted to sort of depict another characteristic of this creature, which is the hinged legs. So I added this straight line with an angle right here. And then I have here where I can actually show you what a little crab leg looks like. And so you can see here how, using this crab leg as a reference, that's sort of another dimension of characteristics of this animal. So I wasn't looking at a crab leg when I made this, but I just had that general idea in mind. So, and I have some crab parts in my cabinet of curiosities, my collection of natural world objects. So this crab then is sort of oriented or kind of lurking over this little spherical form. And so in terms of a story, I got wondering, well, has it found some food on the floor of the sea? Or is this maybe an egg that it's tending? Or if this is, maybe this is actually Cancer, the constellation in the sky. And so, maybe this crab has discovered the moon or some other celestial body. So in keeping with this theme then on the other side, so I'm just going to rotate this and give you kind of a tour of its topographies. Here I added a trilobite, so you can see the segmentation in the body of the trilobite, and then it has these two little delicate antennae. And one of these other lines, these segmented lines, sort of curves around these concentric rings. It's almost like it's maybe the leg of an octopus. And, if we were zoomed out and this were a celestial body, then here we have kind of a circular form with concentric rings, so maybe this is a star with planets orbiting around it. Or if we zoom in to under the sea, maybe this is the eye of some big grouper that's staring at you out of the deep. So then here we have these lines that are sort of expanding. So this could also be an orbit of some sort. So it could be circular or elliptical or even more erratic, depending upon what's orbiting. And then over here we have a, kind of a circle that maybe is a cell wall. And so this could be a strand of DNA inside that cell, or maybe other organelles. And, or it could be, maybe this Tondo Stone form, this round format, is actually, the entire sculpture is an egg, and it's containing this little crab that has not yet hatched. So the Tondo format was actually popular during the Renaissance, and so it refers to essentially just the circular format. So instead of having a rectangular or a square canvas, you might have a round canvas, or if you were working in clay or marble, you might be carving into a disc shape. So that the idea Tondo Stone kind of references a drawing in the round, but in this case on an actual sphere. So I want to talk just a little bit about the function of this. So you can see right here that at the edge it has these serrations where the two openings are carved into the form. And so I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see that a little bit better. And so these are not just for depicting this little softshell crab, but they actually have a function when it comes to floral design. So as you can see here, this is a very thin stemmed plant that I'm going to use to show you. So if it's a very tiny stem, like the stem on a tall blade of grass, for example, it might actually fit into one of these notches and kind of this little irregular comb shape. However, if you are working with a bigger stem, then those would essentially provide grip on one edge to sort of prevent that from slipping. This eye right here, and I believe the other eyes, nope, just one of the eyes is actually a hole that goes all the way through to the center. So you could arrange a stem upright in that little hole. However, because these Tondo stones are essentially like a little tiny planet. You know, they have a surface that can hold up the head of a flower. So, you know, I'm using a dried flower here because we're in the winter season, but you can actually support the head of a flower. So if you were doing like a kind of a bud vase arrangement, you could use a single flower or a couple of flowers, but they could, you know, if they had very short stems, you could just rest the head of the flower on the surface of the vase. So that's a little bit just in terms of the function of the Tondo Stone vases. So I've been thinking of naming this piece Karkinos after the crab in the Greek mythology story of Herakles fighting the Hydra. And apparently in that story, the crab emerged from the swamp to come to the aid of the Hydra and was snapping at the ankles of Herakles to help with the fight. And Herakles became so angered or enraged that he actually crushed the crab underneath his heel. And so Juno, also known as Hera, in honor of the crab's sacrifice, decided to put it in the sky as the constellation Cancer in honor of that sacrifice. So if you're someone who associates the constellations with astrology, then the sign of Cancer would be associated with comfort, support, home, healing, the heart, and of course water, which is very much in keeping with the theme of this particular piece. So that's a little bit of the artistic technique and the evolution of the theme of this piece, as well as some natural history and mythology.